What up, Aurora? How you guys doing? We are back at the park. Back on, this is day 3 of running, and it's miserable. My shins hurt. What's crazy is I don't do cardio ever until right now because I'm just a huge human being right now. But it's not my cardio that's bad. My cardio is actually not that bad. It's my shins. My shins are terrible. So if anybody's got any tips out there, let me know, because here I am, just a fat guy sitting at the park dying. So we're gonna carry on with our look at spiritual disciplines today, and as our interns, our lovely interns who never do anything spitefully, put out the schedule for spiritual disciplines, they thought it would just be really funny to give cold chastity. So that's just really nice of them, really cool of them. Really appreciate every little bit of that. But as I was doing research, it's a lot different than we actually think or think of, and it's interesting. As I've looked at my whole life, chastity was not a topic that I followed all that well. If any of you know my story, and so as I was doing research, there's the normal way that we think of chastity, right? If you've heard of a chastity belt, if you've heard of all that, it's the idea of abstaining from sexual activity of any kind in order to honor God, and that's part of it. That's a good thing, but that's actually not all of it. And so as I was digging more and more, the definition of chastity is the act of being morally pure, just across the board, not just sexually, but across the board. You are taking steps to stay morally pure across the board, which now all of us are included. There's a lot of us that at first were listening and you were like, oh, like sex was never that big a deal, abstaining from sex was never that hard of a thing. Cool, you're still lumped into it because we all have moral failures and areas of our life that are not pure. And then as I dug a little bit deeper even more, it has a lesser, like a definition that's not normally used, but it is used when it comes to looking at this idea of chastity, and that's the idea of maintaining and improving your personal integrity. And integrity is just walking your talk. Like everything that you do lines up. If you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. And so taking those definitions like in mind, taking the idea of like pursuit of being morally pure, abstaining from sex, and working on your personal integrity, that is what chastity is. And so as we look at why that's a spiritual discipline, why that's a good thing, if a lot of you were like me growing up, there was just a lot of like, hey, you don't have sex before you're married. That's what it is. I'm not going to give you an explanation. You just don't do it. And so as my life went on, and as that became a thing that's not true, as I've done premarital counseling with couples who are having sex, I walk them through like what Taylor and I walked through, both before marriage and then after we were married. And I think a lot of us who have been through that type of thing, where we're not following Jesus, or we're not lining our lives up with Him, and then we start to do so, and we realize all these ideas that are in place. They're not rules; they're just ideas that got those out there of like, hey, here is a better way to live. When we actually start looking at those better ways to live, and then we line them up with how our life was, it lines up really easily of like, hey, maybe God's onto something here. Maybe God has a better idea planned here. And so what I always point couples to when we talk about this conversation is like, hey, the goal here is God not like restricting you from sex or restricting you from each other or not giving you something really good. That's for later. He's saving that for later. That's true. But what God wants us to realize is like when it comes to this idea of abstaining, for a lot of us it means a bunch of different things. For some of us it's a way to figure out ways to like find intimacy. Sexual intimacy is the easiest intimacy that we can find. It's what comes naturally to us. It's quick, it's easy, like we know how to get there, and so we get what we want, and then a little bit of time goes by and it's like we want to get what we want again. But the goal of abstaining from it, the goal of finding new ways to find intimacy, is because there's going to be a bunch of times in our lives where sex is not an option. It's not a part of what we do, and instead of going to find that elsewhere, God has set in place a way for us to build and create intimacy with the people that we love, so that we don't do that, so that we don't blow things up, so that we don't go off and do a whole bunch of stuff. And in that, it's honoring to Him, the personal connection, the pursuit of the people that we love, the ways of finding deeper and deeper ways to connect. It isn't sex; it's honoring to who God is. Sex is honoring to God when we get married. It glorifies Him, and it's a perfect showing on earth of man and woman coming together, how God like created it. It's the perfect combination of who God is. But taking all those ideas aside, why is chastity a spiritual discipline? Is the question that we're looking at today, and why is that something that we should focus on? And there's a lot of different lessons in it. But the verse that I want to combine my teaching from last week, where we're going to study 2 verses, and then we're going to just sit on them, meditate on them, and think about them, right? But we're going to jump into Matthew 15, 18, and 19. And I'm going to read this really quick, so you pull out your Bibles. Matthew 15, 18, and 19. I'm going to read it and then jump back into my video, so I hope you guys don't cut out. I think we're good. So Matthew 15, 18, and 19 says, "But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander." So when we think about this idea of chastity and that first and third definition that I gave you of taking strides to be morally pure and taking strides to build your personal integrity, take that verse that Jesus taught on and look at, it's not the surface level, hey, you're going to abstain from sex and you're going to be good to go. That's part of it, but that's not the whole thing. Jesus points to something deeper. Sex for all of us is a very surface level thing. We're trying to pursue something different when we chase after sex. And so for us to look at this, to read that verse, to chew on that verse, to think on that verse, Jesus is pointing to a deeper issue. The idea of chastity is not to restrict you from having sex. The idea of chastity is to put boundaries in place to protect your heart and to work on your heart when it's in an unhealthy spot, and to push yourself to start weeding out evil things that come out of your heart. So like that verse says, like what comes out of the mouth is an overflow of the heart. And the idea of, it's not just what you say, it's the overflow of everything that you do flows out of there. And if we're not protecting it, if we don't have boundaries in place, if we don't have this idea of, think of a chastity belt, right? If we don't have that around our heart to protect it and guide it and hold it, the Bible tells us that it leads us every which way that's not the way that we're supposed to go. The heart is deceitful above all else, right? And so for us to look at this idea of chastity and not look at it like, oh, I'm not having sex, that's great. You know, for a lot of us, for a lot of people, they're like, oh, me and my spouse haven't had sex either. We're doing great. We're doing chastity in marriage, and that's not the point either. The idea of chastity, so like looking at single people that are watching this right now, the idea of chastity right now is to guard your heart, so that way when you step into marriage, when you step into other relationships, when you step into a new job, when you step into all this stuff, you don't bring this baggage with you. All of us who didn't follow this idea beforehand, if we're being honest, we have a lot of baggage that we carry and a lot of baggage that we bring in. We're bringing that baggage with us everywhere we go. And so the idea is, if you can protect that and protect your heart and protect your thoughts and your mind and all that, you're going to step into everything new that you get to step into in a fresh way, where you're not held back by that baggage and you're not bringing that baggage in to dump on the person that you're coming into. So single people, that's for you to think about. What baggage are you bringing into your new relationships? And then for people that are married, this idea of chastity keeps playing out in the fact that it's like your job now is to protect your marriage, to put boundaries in place around your marriage, to protect your heart in your marriage. Think about that. It's not, hey, now restrict everything and don't do everything that we look at and say is bad. It's this idea that now our job is to protect our hearts and the hearts of the people entrusted to us across the board, not just with sex, but across the board. Like everything that was listed there flows out of the heart. Our job is to protect our heart. So I have a couple questions for us that I want you to reread those 2 verses. And then from there, my questions are, what boundaries are you putting in place right now to protect your heart? What does that look like? And if you don't know what that looks like reach out to us. We have steps that we can do to help you get there. But what are you doing right now to protect your heart, so that your heart doesn't lead you to a place you're not supposed to go? And then you might be somebody who's listening, it's like, hey, I've actually gotten really good at this. I've done a good job of putting boundaries up. And that's great, but walls need to be maintained. So what are you doing right now to inspect the boundaries that you've put up, to make sure that they're the right ones, they're in the right spot, and they're strong and holding? Because if we're gonna step out of whatever we're walking through, or we're gonna make it through whatever we're walking through, it's because we've protected the most important things in our life, that our hearts, our minds, our thoughts, our everything. Chastity is this idea that you're gonna pursue moral purity and you're gonna push your personal integrity. What in your life right now is not lined up in integrity, and how can you change that? Who do you need to talk to change that? a lot of times chastity gets put out there as like, hey, this is the thing that we're striving for, and it becomes legalistic, and you're going to do 50 steps to get there. And that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is there are parts of our life that aren't pure. There are parts of our life that aren't lined up with what Jesus says is right, best, and true. What do we need to do to put boundaries in place to protect those areas and get it back to line up with Jesus? That's the goal. And it's not legalistic. It's not forcing you. It's not making a bunch of rules. It's the idea that life is supposed to be better than what we have right now. And what do we do to get things better? We put boundaries around things and we rebuild. That's what we do. So we love you guys. If you have questions about this, please reach out, reread those verses, and start looking at what boundaries need to be put in place right now for you to protect your heart. Because what flows out of your heart is what the world sees. We love you guys. Bye.